I've just concluded my walk around the lake with an old friend, Jeremy Bowen, international editor of the BBC. We've talked about the Iran war, and in fact, Jeremy was here earlier on in the day for our first view discussion on the Iran war and its impact. And we went into that into some depth, exploring where we are now, but kind of recognizing that's a moment in time and looking as to where it might go in the future. That led naturally to a discussion of President Trump's approach to the crisis, the way he's trying to use American hard power to have impact on the world and to create a new set of conditions, and an exploration between us of what that might mean for American soft power as we go ahead. Jeremy has been working on the Middle East for many, many years. I mean, first of all, as a correspondent there, then as the kind of Middle East editor. But as he says in our discussion, he's been pulled back to the Middle East because it's still a place where extraordinary things happen and shape events. And it's often difficult, and that led us to talk about personal resilience, some of the really challenging moments he's had, covering wars, covering airstrikes, and sometimes being mixed up in those personally, even though you're trying really hard as a journalist not to become the story. And finally, I think in a really interesting discussion, we looked at what technology, social media, the proliferation of sources of information is doing to journalistic work. Is it getting harder? Is it getting easier? And what is it doing to this idea of discoverable facts, of an objective reality for everyone? Is it getting harder to report the truth and to persuade people that you are reporting the truth? For Jeremy, being there, being able to say you were there and look the people in the eye is still the best guarantee of the truth and a sense of immediacy. And I was really struck by that commitment. I hope you enjoy it. Jeremy, great to have you.
Good to see you.
Really good to see you.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
It's good to be here. What a place.
It's not your first time.
No, it's
It's brilliant to have you back.
And you never have to ask me twice to come to Ditchley because it's really a unique place.
Oh, thank you. Well, it's always a pleasure to have such interesting conversations here. I should say, before we get into this, I should say I almost held your arm then, because the last one of these I did was with a friend of mine, Chris Mayers, who's this amazing technology investor, but he's also been blind from birth.
Oh.
So we had to do it arm in arm.
Well, my eyes are still just about okay. So we'll be all right. You don't need to do that.
I don't need to do that.
Well, we're British after all.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Look, let's start with what's happening right now. We've just been talking at Ditchley about the impact of the Iran war, trying to analyse a first view of what's happened and where it might go next. You've been covering crises and wars in the Middle East and beyond for decades. What's expected about this one? What's different? I mean, what's your frame of reference for it and how important it is, both for the region and beyond?
Well, first of all, the crisis is going on. As we speak today, the ceasefire is still holding. Donald Trump has still got his ships, the US Navy, just outside the Strait of Hormuz. The Iranians are saying that the strait will be open for at least a while. But all of that could change by, frankly, the time we get back to the house. So we'll see. So I think what we can say at this point is that this is a monumentally important crisis. It's important on a number of different levels. It's important because, first of all, the reasons why the Americans and the Israelis went to war in the first place. The 47-year-old conflict between the Islamic Republic of Iran and the United States. It's important because of what it says to us about the stability, or lack of it, I should say, and the dangers in the region, and not just the region, the way it has ramifications already globally, not least because of the restrictions on traffic through the Strait of Hormuz, which it turns out is an enormously important choke point. I think we sort of knew that, but maybe not to the degree that it actually has transpired. And also, and this is the point I bang on a bit about, is that especially in my job as international editor of the BBC, and maybe my problem is I focus a bit too much on bad news, but there are an awful lot of crises going on around the world with no seeming easy exits from, and I think that this is because we are in such an uncertain period, fraught with dangers in many ways, long-term crisis. We had, for many years, when we were growing up, the Cold War was still going on. And while, of course, there was always in the background the idea we might get fried in some kind of nuclear holocaust.
Yes.
The fact is there was, looking back on it, a lot of strategic stability at the time possibly because of that risk. So we had the Cold War, the post-Cold War, that period when the Americans were the undisputed top dog back in the 90s, the way that changed, the rise of China, things are changing. And essentially we're in a point now, globally, if you look at it, where we don't really know where we're going. I think we know that a new world is forming, but at this stage we're sort of making guesses about what it's going to be. And I think that this war and this crisis and the wider ramifications are absolutely front and center of that tendency.
Yeah. What does it tell us about American power? I mean, it has been an extraordinary military display, but the limits of power, do you think, so far?
Well, it tells us that American hard power, in other words, their capacity to wage war with extraordinary, accurate, devastatingly deadly weapons, is unparalleled. That no one else can do what they can do. The amount of power that they built this up over decades, investing vast amounts of money and expertise. After the Vietnam War, where their army, conscript army, was frankly, it seemed to be quite a shambles, and they had a defeat there. They modernized and modernized and modernized, and now they're spending more than $1 trillion a year on their armed services. So their hard power and their expertise is extraordinary. But power, I remember my first lesson, I went to an American graduate school to do a postgraduate degree in international affairs. I remember one of the very first lessons, probably in the first week, we were talking about Clausewitz, we were talking about war being an extension of politics by other means. That old well-known phrase. And actually, you look at the world of Donald Trump and US power, it's never been truer in a sense. And the lack of strategic clarity, to put it very politely, or chaotic oscillation, another way of putting it, coming out of the White House, means that it doesn't correlate that having this extraordinary power that the Americans have in military terms can automatically change the world in the way that they would like the world to be changed. In fact, far from it, because they are struggling when it comes to dealing with a much weaker adversary in the shape of the Islamic Republic.
My sense of President Trump is that he seems to view his unpredictability as one of his sort of most powerful levers, that people can't decide, can't predict what he's going to do, and therefore he destabilizes them, and they believe actually he might order the death of a civilization, as he put it. How do you think that's played out with another unpredictable adversary in the form of the Iranians?
Well, to start with, yes, I know that he does regard this as one of his superpowers. He's written about it. I think this goes back to his days when he was a really well-known property developer back in the 80s, and he wrote The Art of the Deal. And essentially it was always keep your opponent guessing, always ask for the max, push as hard as you can. Well, that worked with real estate. And frankly, he was better at talking about real estate than actually making money out of it.
Yeah.
He managed to bankrupt himself several times because of, he was one of the few casino owners who went bankrupt. So maybe his business skills are not as great as he hopes. And I think that when you're dealing with the complex world of nations and power, you need some subtlety, you need some consistency. I think if you're representing a country like, a huge power like the United States, this random scattergun effect that he contrives, I think it's highly counterproductive. Yeah, it does keep people guessing, but it also damages, I think, America's own interests, which is to try to have a world that, I would say, is what he wants, make America great again, put America first. They want a world that benefits them, and I'm not sure a world of chaos benefits them in the way that he seems to think it might.
And flipping to the Iranian side, I've been a little bit surprised by how well they've been able to hold a kind of strategic line, or at least a tactical line in response to what's happened to them.
Yeah.
This began with the famous, now infamous perhaps, decapitation of the regime, that kind of morning strike on the leadership meeting, including killing the supreme leader and several others.
And his family. Much of it, yeah.
And, they were clearly prepared for that, and they've maintained hold of Iran, much to the detriment ultimately of the Iranian people, given that the recent brutal suppression of the protests. But more than that, they've been very canny about rationing their use of missiles and drones to keep it going, and they've kind of played cards sequentially, and they've been able to get benefit from closing the Straits of Hormuz and having this big impact potentially on the global economy, which we should go into a bit. But at the same time, they have been reduced. Their ability to threaten their neighbours is real, particularly the Gulf. But they're much less strong than they were. Do you think they emerge from this secure, or is it too early to say? Because we could expect more trouble later.
It's probably a little early to say, because this crisis is still going on. There is no permanent deal, or even a semi-permanent deal going on beyond this initial 2-week ceasefire, which we're still in at the moment as we speak. But, in a sense, they worked out what they were going to do. I think it's pretty clear that Donald Trump was expecting a quick victory. Venezuela-style operation, you decapitate the regime, you find that there's someone in there who can be an amiable puppet in the way that Delcy Rodriguez seems to have become in Venezuela. And I think it, though, speaks to the fact that while there are immensely smart people in Washington, D.C., who know everything there is to know about every aspect of international affairs, they're not in the White House, they're not talking to Trump. And anyway, if they are, he's not listening to them. Because I think it completely got the essence of what the Iranian regime is wrong. And that regime is, clearly it's an appalling regime. The way that they oppress people, the way that to stay in power, they're quite happy to kill thousands of their own citizens in the streets. So, that first of all should point to a regime that is quite ruthless, very ruthless, and a regime as well that is dedicated to its own survival.
Yeah. One of the things I think you've been really good at, Jeremy, all your reporting I've ever watched, is, as you said, trying to take complexity and not to dumb it down, but to lift out some lines, some themes that people can hold on to, and try and understand the conflict and get a sense of its true nature. Could you just say a bit more about that and how you think about it?
Well, the thing is, if you're a journalist and you're working for the FT or the New York Times or the Sun or the Daily Mail, you basically know who your audience is. certain demographic, a certain kind of people, a certain sort of background, they're coming from a certain place. If you're a broadcaster for an organization as big as the BBC, then it's a much broader list of people who will be watching the news, and maybe people who just found themselves watching it that day because they're waiting for the next program, or because something big has happened they want to watch. And it may be people, you know, like yourself, had a long career in diplomacy, who knows a great deal about what's going on in the world, or it could be someone who'd like to know more but doesn't, you know, did not do Middle East studies at university or whatever, or Russian studies.
Yeah.
So the way I try and construct my reports, and I don't always succeed, but this is the objective, is in a way like a layer cake, where depends how much you want to dig through the layers, but where I want to be able to do a report which, if you know, I always assume the audience is intelligent.
Yeah.
I never assume knowledge. So what I need to do, my challenge is to try to come up with a report that is coherent, inherently understandable and not contradictory, which if you are the person who's a very interested member of the audience, but maybe not that well informed, you'll get something out of it. And maybe someone like you will get something out of it too. Maybe it's just a nuance.
Yeah, sure.
And a lot of that is how you write it. And because, I mean, these days we do all kinds of platforms, you know, audio, visual, video, podcast, you name it. But over the years, I still regard myself very much as a TV reporter. And then, so a lot of it is about the material you have. And if you can use that material well, pictures, audio, interviews, then they are the tools and the clay, if you like, that you can fashion into something.
Yeah.
I'm mixing my metaphors like mad here: tools, clay, cakes. But you know what I mean.
They're all fashionable.
They're fashionable. You can try and. So that's what I try and do. It doesn't always work, because sometimes you haven't got the visuals. What has been really difficult, for example, is reporting the war in Gaza in those 2 years until the ceasefire, last autumn. Because why? Because we weren't allowed in. Because a lot of my reporting philosophy is based on the importance of being there.
Yeah.
I feel that being there is really important for a number of reasons. First of all, some of the best tools that we have as human beings are our own eyes and ears.
Yeah.
And second of all, if someone, and there is a war on the truth at the moment being waged around the world by all kinds of people for all kinds of different reasons. One of the best tools that we have to push back against that as journalists is the fact you can say, well, actually, I was there and I saw it and I spoke to people and I witnessed it myself. And we haven't been able to do that with the war in Gaza. We've done everything we can to do it by remote control, working with incredibly brave local freelance journalists who we have Palestinian producers in Jerusalem who spend the day talking to them. This was at the height of what was going on there. But nothing really beats being there. And I felt this strongly since I was as a young, I'd done a few things, but I wasn't as experienced as I became journalist back in 1991 in the first Gulf War. I was in Baghdad, and it was a huge thing for me in my career at the time, and it was a massive world story. I was only there because John Simpson got taken ill. He was the one who was meant to be doing it, and I was basically on the subs bench. Yeah. And they sent me on. He was there for the first day or two of the war. Most of them got thrown out apart from CNN, and then they let people back in, and I went back in. I was there for, I don't know what it was, 5 or 6 weeks probably, until we got booted at the end of the war. And one of the biggest single days was when the Americans hit an air raid facility, an air raid shelter in a suburb of Baghdad called Arroyo, killed more than 400 people. And I went down there, they let us report very freely, unlike other incidences there. We could go where we want, film what we want, talk to who we wanted to do. And I saw the bodies coming out, and they were women, children, and old men. I spoke to people outside who were basically the men of the house who'd taken their families there the night before. They'd go home and guard their property. And then I was absolutely gobsmacked when I got on air and the presenter said to me, well, the MOD in London and the Pentagon in America are saying that it was a command center. I said, what? I was nonplussed. I thought it's pretty obvious what's happened here. The Americans thought this was a target. I didn't think the Americans were deliberately trying to kill 400 plus civilians because it looked really bad. I didn't think it was in their interests. And I was able to say, look, I don't know what this building was used for in the past, but I've been there, I've seen the bodies, I've used my own eyes, my own ears, and I'm telling you, there is no evidence it was a command center. And at the time, there was a massive hoo-ha in the anti-BBC media here, in the one of the newspaper groups really seriously libeled me. They compared me to the man known in World War II in this country as Lord Haw Haw, William Joyce, who broadcast from Berlin on behalf of the Nazis and was executed, I believe, at Pentonville Prison, or maybe Brixton, Pentonville, I think, in 1945 and 1946 for treason. They compared me to him. Small picture of him, big picture of Lord Haw Haw reborn in Baghdad, because I was spouting this nonsense that it wasn't a command center. And to start with, they paid me a good settlement of libel damages, and I still live in the house, which I was able to buy with some of the proceeds of that. And more than that, I knew I was right because I'd been there. And that's why since then, I've sometimes found myself in really quite dangerous situations, not because I like danger, but because if I feel that if I'm going to do my job properly, sometimes I have to see for myself.
Well, that's coming back to this. I know you don't want, as a journalist, you don't want to make yourself the story. And as you say, you're an outsider looking in and you can get away, but you do have to be there. And I think that does take resilience. I mean, have you found your attitude to that has changed as time has gone on? Have you been more willing to go to dangerous places to get the story? Or have you like a war photographer like Don McCullin, just got to the point where it's enough and you need to get away from that? I mean, that sounds horrific, being there while hundreds of bodies of civilians are brought out.
So many bodies.
It's just a horrible thing to do.
And the bodies were not in a good state.
No. And then, that's your job. I mean, just any reflection on what you think that has meant for you?
Oh yeah, I mean, you'd have to be made of stone for it not to affect you.
Yeah.
I mean, I've had situations, I was working in South Lebanon in 2000 when the Israelis were, they've started a new occupation of South Lebanon, but they were ending their 18-year occupation at that day. And they opened fire on us with a tank. And the driver and fixer, Abed Takush, was killed in his car by a tank shell, and I just got out of the car with the Lebanese cameraman Malik Kanan, and we were pinned down for several hours. They tried to kill us as well. I was in during the demonstrations after the army overthrew the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt in 2013, I think it was 2013. I was shot. I mean, wasn't high velocity. It was buckshot, but it was in my ears, my head, and it was in my leg. I had to have a 3-hour operation when I got back to London to get the bits taken out. And another, dangerous moments and dreadful moments. And I think you certainly become resilient in terms of dealing with it. I think war reporting, for a certain mindset of people, of which I was probably one to start with, it's exciting, can be.
Yeah.
The first war I went to was El Salvador in 1989. And oh my God, I felt like I was in my own movie. It was amazing, it was like being in a film. And I realized pretty quickly that that's rather a, shallow response. But I think it's, as a 29-year-old guy and, that age, you feel pretty indestructible.
Yeah.
Same sort of mentality. There's a guy called Anthony Feinstein who's looked into the impact of being in war zones on journalists. So he's a psychologist, and looking at trauma. And one thing he says, it's one thing that's remarkable is not the number of people who have damaged emotionally as a result of it, but the number of people who aren't. And he said, look, it's the same kind of mentality that makes young men ride motorcycles too fast.
Yeah.
You know, and that sort of thing. But as time went by quite quickly, I realized that unless you have a higher journalistic purpose, it's just the worst kind of war tourism. I mean, you come into people's lives sometimes at their very worst moments. Their whole family's been killed that day. Yeah. I've interviewed people who are burying their families who have been killed 2 hours earlier. Mm. And it's amazing how actually people want to talk, and you have to protect them. People in that situation are so emotionally at sea that sometimes they say all sorts of things they don't really mean to say, and you have to be quite responsible. But, you know, I do think, I know there are some really bad things in the world, and I think it is important that we know about them. And the way that my working life was worked out, and I was hoping to be Washington correspondent when I started at the BBC. I didn't think I'd be ending up running around the world and in my 60s I've still got a flak jacket at home to take on trips. Mm. But that's the way it's worked out. And I think that in a really confused world full of crisis, then it's important to have people who are prepared to say what's going on. But yeah, it is different. And I'll tell you what's really hard these days, the amount of hate that we get on social media. I've stopped looking at X. Yeah. And I used to quite enjoy it when it was called Twitter. And I used to put a lot on it. I had quite a lot of followers. I still have quite a lot of followers. But, you know, sorry, folks, I don't really post anymore because, it's just so vicious and vile, some of the abuse. Mm. And you have to grow a thick skin. And I think what also helps is if you've done your homework, you've been there, or as close to it as you can get, and you get what, and you're confident they're in your own mind, you get what those, you know, Bernstein and Woodward, the Watergate journalists, the Washington Post, called, I think they had their phrase as something like the best obtainable version of the truth.
Yeah.
And that's, given the constraints that we have, that's what we're trying to get.
Thanks, Jeremy. Thanks for talking so freely. I think what I would take away is your, assumption that people are intelligent, but they may not have knowledge.
Yeah, I think it's very important to understand that. Yeah.
To understand that. And also that, what makes this both bearable and morally appropriate is journalistic purpose. Mm. Okay, now you're international editor with a world view. Yeah. I think we should talk, what does this mean on the bigger scale? And, you've talked about the nature of President Trump's decision-making and administration from your perspective. Yes. This is, I'm sure he and others with him would argue, this is America reasserting itself on the world stage. And we are in this new challenging, interesting contest for power, contest for influence between America and China. And we've just been talking about how, China stands behind Pakistan as a key ally, key country, and Pakistan, and also has influence on Iran. So America is up front, but China is behind the scenes, arguably, as this crisis proceeds in the Middle East. How do you see this developing? I mean, President Trump is due to meet President Xi Jinping shortly, and everyone expects an attempt at some sort of grand bargain, because that's the president's nature, to try and make a deal. He wrote the art of the deal, as you said.
He wants the big deal, doesn't he?
He wants the big deal.
Yeah.
How do you see this playing out?
Well, it's going to be the story of the 21st century, long after you and I have ceased caring, the rise of China. it is unstoppable. If you look at the economic stats over the last 25 years, more than that now, 26 years, since the turn of the century,
Yeah.
their economy has grown massively.
Yes.
And their global influence has grown exponentially, and that is only going to speed up. And there is this debate, of course, about China as the rising power and America as the declining power that's past its peak. And that's something, I suppose, that Trump is trying to combat. MAGA, make America great again.
Yeah.
There are lots of people who would argue that a lot of Americans would argue America never stopped being great.
Yeah.
That actually it's been extraordinarily successful and amazingly influential. It still has, and it had it before Trump, no matter what he says, an extraordinarily dynamic economy. Those companies that dominate the world in so many ways, the big tech companies, they're all from one small part of America.
Yes.
And that is an extraordinary ecosystem which is driving their economy, their levels of productivity, the way that their real incomes have, even though they complain they haven't grown as much as they would like to have, they've grown a lot more, I think, than incomes have in this country.
Yeah.
So, economically there's loads of things. So, it is a fact that America did have its moment as the unipolar power, after the end of the Cold War, and that was never going to last. But I think that China now, if you look at it in these terms of challenge, is a challenge around the world. And I suppose it's a shame that people do look at it in that sense.
Yeah.
I mean, why should nations be fated to challenge each other?
Yeah.
Why can't we live together? Lots of people would say that. My mother would definitely say that. And I guess the reasons are that there's a competition for resources, there's a competition for influence, there's a competition for power, and this is being seen right now. And one of the things we were discussing today up at the big house was, I brought this thing up, is whether or not this war is for the decline of America as a world power, what Suez was for the decline of Britain as a world power. And of course, the two things are, it's not a great comparison because, we're a small island that was essentially bankrupted after the Second World War. And it was the last twitches of, very misguided leadership at the time. And America is not going to collapse economically. It's not vulnerable in the way that Britain was in 1956. But in terms of the decision making that will have strategic consequences for its future, well, you could argue that Trump has blundered into a terrible mistake that they will suffer the consequences of for a long time. If you look around the Middle East now, the consequences of a earlier American blunder, which was the catastrophic consequences of the 2003 invasion of Iraq, they're still being felt.
Yeah.
They're still being felt.
Yeah.
More than 20 years on from that. And so, I don't know how long the consequences of this will go on. I think a lot of that is a factor for how and when it ends. But, we are in a different time now. I don't think there's any going back to the situation in the Gulf beforehand, the situation in the Strait of Hormuz beforehand, and also in the way that America's power is perceived in the world, because what we have seen is a country that is massively weaker in terms of stark military terms, taking on not just the Americans but the Israelis, and the regime surviving.
Yeah.
Which I don't think many people necessarily expected would be the case when all this began.
Yeah. I understand what you say on that competition in states. Do you think, though, that the reporting of China is as it should be? You've covered you've been up at the front and the Ukraine war.
Yeah.
That Russia's invasion of Ukraine, under no real threat, despite President Putin's constant claims from Ukraine or indeed from NATO. Should we go up here? We can have a look up here.
This is is this a folly?
This is a folly, or what the Americans, I think, strikingly call an eye catcher. But no, it's sort of like, it provides a focus point in the landscape. And it's also a really good place to look across the lake.
Let's
go up.
How do you get up there?
We'll go around the back.
Right, come on.
Look, you've covered the war in Ukraine.
Yes.
You know as well as I do how central China is to sustaining that war.
Yes.
1.5 million people probably by now are dead and injured. And China seems completely comfortable with that as a price of policy because it ties up the US, it keeps NATO distracted, and that concerns me. I completely think we should be engaging with China. I think China has wrought technological and economic miracles. But do you think that's reported sufficiently?
You mean the fact that they are, you would say, quite relaxed about the fact that the way that they have helped the Russian war effort has resulted in so many dead people?
Yeah, and I don't see that covered very often. Where people say, here I am at the front in Ukraine, and another 30,000 Russians have died this month.
Probably 15,000 Ukrainians.
Something like that. Yeah. And that's happening because quietly China is fully behind Russia and has decided that Russia cannot lose, even though Russia is the aggressor. And this is not asking sort of China to fight against Russia. It's kind of, and I'm really asking about the reporting of it. And
I think it's if you're in I was in February, I was in Donetsk, which is one of the areas in the far east of Ukraine, which is being fought over at the moment. And it's very much a war zone. Drones, all the roads are netted against drones. And it's quite hard when you're in a place like that to then extend it to the wider issues of why it's happening. That's more documentary territory probably rather than news. But on the wider principle of countries being relaxed about killing, I mean, I don't think in the West we have got a great deal to boast about on that in terms of, over the years, how many people were killed as a result of the American invasion, of which Britain was, full participant and the number two part of that in 2003 of Iraq. I mean, hundreds of thousands. We have looked on pretty much as Israel killed at least 70,000 people, probably more, in Gaza, in a very small area in the course of 2 years. So, we're not Simon Pure on any of these things. But I think it probably would be a good idea perhaps if we spoke more about the consequences of actions by states, because states, powerful states, they make decisions which have enormous impacts on individuals, on millions of individuals. And in the end, it's being made by a small group of mostly guys in a room somewhere. And perhaps we should actually talk more about, and I mean that in many ways is a moral dimension. Maybe we don't get enough into that sort of thing. Maybe we should.
I get the tension between covering the actual immediacy of the war and then the background angles behind it. I mean, another aspect on this is that the Ukrainians don't complain because they want to preserve their own relationship with China. And China continues to allow the Ukrainians to source batteries and servo motors for drones, without which they would be in trouble. So China is kind of
buy a lot of Chinese-made. There's Chinese-made stuff on both sides.
Yeah, so there is Chinese-made stuff on both sides, and I can see why the Ukrainians want to to preserve that relationship. It's crucial to them. But I do think that, and I accept, that the West has had its own versions of wars that have resulted in unintended consequences.
We had Trump a week or two ago saying we will take Iran back to the Stone Ages unless they do as I tell them to do, and a civilization will die tonight. I think was the phrase, something like that, wasn't it?
That was the phrase.
And I know people say, well, don't take him literally, just look at what he does. But I mean, I was with some diplomats earlier on today from the Middle East, and one of them said, that night, he said, I could not sleep, he said to me.
There was a lot of criticism in that phrase in America, and I think...
Yeah, there was quite rightly, I'd say.
The MAGA movement to
it's genocidal language.
Yeah, there's a lot of criticism of that phrase, I know. But I do think that we're sometimes in our coverage a little too elliptical around China on these kind of things. I
think China is still, for a lot of us in the West, we don't really fully get it. I have worked in China. Yeah. I was there in '89 at the time of Tiananmen and the immediate aftermath of that for a few months. Very little since then. I did a trip to Taiwan recently, and we need to know more about it. And I think that decoding China is a continuing challenge for people in the West, actually, and people certainly in the media. I don't think and of course, for the people who are based there, it's really quite hard to work. Yes, because there are it's an oppressive society. Yeah, and they don't welcome. I mean, there are many countries around the world that don't welcome free reporting these days. Even countries that come from, the Western camp, which supposedly prides itself in these things. But in China, it is very hard to get around, very hard to talk to people, very hard to try and do the job. It's a good question. Do you think, for all the information, for all the technological resources, has the job of a journalist changed? Is it harder than it used to be? Is it more difficult to get to the truth, or do you think you've been enabled, if you have the money? Obviously, there's a funding challenge. Yeah. But if for models of journalism, but if you have the money, do you think it's easier to get to the truth or harder now? And are people willing to listen to it? Well, it's a couple of levels of that. The job, I think the fundamental job of trying to find out what the heck's going on and retell it as truthfully as you can has always been the same. And I think it applies to all levels and different types of journalism, not just the kind of stuff I've done over the years, but whether you're doing the dealings of your local council, insofar as those get reported these days, and it's an issue locally often that they don't get reported in the way that they should do, that they once were when there were thriving local papers, which don't really exist in most places anymore, unfortunately. The technology has made everything so much more immediate. I mean, when I started at the BBC in 1984, I was overwhelmed with the resource that we had, which was called news information, where you'd call a number and you'd say, please get me some cuttings on the French election, say. And then an hour or so later, someone would ring up and say, they're ready, and you walk down to Newsinf, as we called it. They'd give you a great big envelope of A3 copies of newspapers. I was just bowled over by the immediacy, the breadth. The photocopies. And now, in our phones, my God, we've got 10 million times that. Yeah. Just here. Yeah. And all that has changed. So back then, for me, for journalists, the issue sometimes was just even finding out some basic facts. Yeah. Or basic events. Yeah. And now that's not the issue. The issue now is working your way through a blizzard of information, much of which, particularly as AI gathers speed, might not be true. You mentioned the war on truth, and we were just talking about the blizzard of information now available on the internet via your phone, and now increasingly mediated by AI. How is that changing
telling the truth as a journalist, finding the truth as a journalist, and convincing people that you are telling the truth. Because it
makes it really hard.
Yeah, because particularly because if you ask someone, or at least parts of the Make America Great Again movement, they would, see the BBC as a front for globalism. And you as an agent of world government, perhaps. How has it changed, and what's your best tactics?
Well,
what are your best tactics for countering that?
We have to try and show an audience, our audiences plural, because they are very diverse, that we are worthy of trust, of their trust, that we are able to give them a little bit more than simply they get from doing a search on their favorite social media, which, as we know, the algorithms tend to give you what you want to hear anyway. And that is it's the challenge, actually.
Let's get on here, because I think I saw some hares.
Oh my God.
It might be nice to show you if you could see them, although they may have run off.
It's a massive challenge. It's really the challenge now, is how to get people, because, when I started the BBC, if you wanted to know what was going on, the audience, you'd have to tune into the news. You'd have to sit down at 6 o'clock or at 9 o'clock or whenever and watch a news bulletin or listen to it on the radio.
Yes.
And now people get their news all day long if they're interested in it.
Yeah.
Plenty of people only look at websites. More and more people look at YouTube and get things through YouTube. I know the BBC has plans to do more with YouTube, put more of our, I hate the word content, but
Why do you hate content?
Well, it sounds a bit like a filler.
A filler?
And it's not really. We are trying to do decent journalism, but there are many, many new ways of getting it to people. And we have to realise that not everybody anymore wants to sit down in front of the fire at 10 o'clock and watch the news. Maybe people of my age, some of them, I don't know what the median age is of people watching the 10, but it's probably people who are, I'm born in the 1960s, perhaps, or even sooner, even before that.
Yes.
It's an unanswered question at the moment, how it is that we win this. It is a war on truth, actually, in many ways, because I think one thing that has changed is that people of power are really aware in a way that they weren't necessarily 30, 40, 50 years ago, of winning the information war, mastering the information battlefield.
Yeah.
I've done a lot of war reporting over the years that I think has made war reporting more dangerous, in that not just states, but insurgent movements or people who want to get their story onto the world information superhighway, onto the 24/7 news merry-go-round that never stops now. Well, they do things that will get them there, and one of the things they might do is knock off a journalist, frankly. And also you get blamed for being the messenger.
Yes.
In recent years, I have just on any given day randomly, if I look at my inbox and people guess my email, or if I look at social media, which I try not to do, as I say. But I do sometimes because there is information on it. I've been accused of being, an apologist for genocide, a pro-Israel shrill, an anti-Semite, a Jew hater. None of these things are true. And I hate hearing this stuff, but people get these things into their mind, and they watch things and they see things in their algorithms that amplify all of that. So people make up their minds about stuff without actually giving. Unfortunately, I think social media pushes people into more and more vehement reactions to things, and also there seems to be this weird human characteristic that people feel they could be a lot ruder tapping away on their phone than they might be to your face.
Look, Joe, you've been doing this for 42 years?
April the 24th, 1984 was my first day at the BBC.
Amazing,
Yeah.
amazing. What's coming up in the next 6 months? And I mean, obviously there's some war you probably don't know about yet, but apart from
Yeah.
Cuba,
Yes.
let's say,
Cuba. Greenland,
potentially,
maybe we'll go back to Greenland.
Cuba, Greenland, or some other sort
Yeah.
of
Panama Canal.
some other kind of like
Yeah.
crisis zone ahead, conceivably. What's coming up for you? And then what's your longer term view? What do you want to do
Well-
now? You're at the top of your profession, doing what you love.
Yeah.
What do you want to do?
Well, first of all, I want to keep on going. I can't, I mean, God, it feels weird saying it. I'm 66, try and keep fit.
Yeah,
I've still got my marbles.
sure.
Yeah, well, I hope so. So I plan to keep on going while, my health permits. I had cancer a few years ago, so I know how things can change on the health front very quickly.
Yeah.
I'm okay now, though. I have an interesting little venture happening in September and October, and I'm making, this might become an annual event if it goes well, a tour of theatres where I am doing, I'm going to put together what I hope will be an interesting talk and videos and so on the theme of truth under fire. Much of the stuff we've been talking about, in fact. So I'll be going to theatres basically up and down the UK, which is going to be really interesting. And because I worked for the BBC for a long time, I've got a lot of long service leave that I haven't taken. And so I'm going to take some of that, and tickets are going well, and it's going to be a really interesting new challenge for me, actually, with a live audience. I've done a bit of this because I've done some books, so at book festivals,
Yes.
it's very interesting having the audience there in front of you rather than being in some remote place and broadcasting into the ether.
Yeah, that must be really interesting to you, to be engaging with people directly.
Oh, I love it. It's great.
You like it?
I like human beings. Yeah.
You don't prefer them down a goggle box.
No.
You know.
And you get instant feedback. My God, you can tell with a live audience. And I have done quite a lot of speaking to live audiences, not just but various events. You can tell if you've lost them.
Okay.
In an instant.
Yeah.
Because you can tell if you've got them too, in terms of people being interested in, they're not looking at their phones.
Yeah.
They're not looking at their watches. They're not sort of chomping away at their crisps or something like that. That they are. You can tell from the atmosphere in the room.
Yeah.
And that's hopefully, I'm going to try and come up with interesting enough stuff that people will take an interest. And also, I like the fact that people are interested enough to be prepared to give up an evening to go and listen to this kind of thing.
Yeah.
So it's going to be actually a really, for me, I hope, a really sort of interesting and fruitful exercise, as well as being, it's nice to do different things.
Yeah, absolutely.
You need new challenges at all stages of your life.
Well,
and for me, going off in a hurry to a place on an aeroplane and doing a package for the 10 o'clock news and a two-way on the Today programme and writing a long piece for the website or whatever.
Yeah.
I mean, in a sense, that's my comfort zone. I've been doing it for a long time.
Yeah.
So this is something different, and I like being challenged.
I think it's really interesting to do new things like that. I saw we were living in Paris and we went to see the comedian Eddie Izzard, who does the O2, who does kind of stadiums.
Yes.
And he did a comedy show in French in a tiny club, and he was incredibly funny, and his French was really good enough. He's got his script, and I thought that was really interesting.
So you speak French well, Eddie?
Yeah, he did. Yeah. He does. And it was hugely impressive that he'd chosen to kind of stretch himself to do something different.
Funny in a different language, a different language.
Yeah.
It's only 20 miles away across the channel, but there is we have certain differences with the French.
Paris is, having lived there for 4 years, Paris is a really foreign place, really interesting place, I can confirm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's really interesting, I must say. It's interesting, the degree of foreignness, because I think sometimes when the Brits go to America, they think, well, we speak the same language, it's going to... And there are moments in America where, particularly on the East Coast, I'd say there are places which for a European can seem, well, not all that different to where we come from, but you
Yeah.
go to the wider great sweep of the continent, and there's a
There's
hair.
the hair.
There's a
There's
hair.
the hair.
Yeah. And you realise, that actually we have the same language, but my goodness me, we don't necessarily come from the same place mentally. And I went for a year to. I mentioned earlier on, I went to an American graduate school, and they have a school in Bologna,
Yes.
and in Italy, and I did a year there as well as being in Washington DC. And there I realised, because it was all, everyone spoke English.
Yeah.
I realised then it made me feel like a European.
Mm-hmm.
Because while I had great American friends, they came from a different place.
Mm-hmm.
But, I shared a flat with 3 guys who are still my great friends, one from Belgium, one from the Netherlands, and one from Sweden.
Mm.
And we conversed in English. And it was, for me, it helped shape my identity to realise I'm a European. And then when I went to the US,
Yeah.
it shaped my identity in other ways, because at that time in the early 1980s, I felt my horizons expanding enormously. I went from being a real America skeptic to being a big supporter of America, as the land of possibility,
Yeah.
a land where people, I was, back in the early 80s, it was a bit gloomy in this country, economic recession, people would be a bit down,
Yes.
down in the dumps.
Yep.
And in America, people seem to be saying, well, you're interested in doing that? Great.
Yeah.
Why don't you do it? And if
Yeah.
it doesn't work out, do something else.
Yeah.
Not, I don't know if I'll manage that. I don't think I'll bother. Which seemed to me actually to be, sadly, back home, a bit more part of the then prevailing attitudes.
There is something special about that American attitude. I remember a senior American diplomat, an ambassador,
Yeah.
actually to the UK, when I first started doing Ditchley,
Yeah.
said to me,
Yeah.
"The Brits don't do awesome."
No.
That was his accurate insight.
Yeah.
That
But sometimes the Americans do awesome when it's not awesome.
No, that is also true.
Yeah.
That is also true. But he had a point, and I always disappoint American friends when
Nature notes.
Yeah.
Another big bird. What could that be?
that could be a falcon or it could be a kite.
Wow.
I couldn't see. We've got lots of kites. We have both.
It looked like an animal-eating bird.
Yeah.
Bird of prey. But no, you're right about the Americans. And it's a endlessly interesting relationship, because we clearly have all these links. So I do think that this phrase "special relationship" should be banned, because it's only special to us. It's not special. You never hear it in America, except when they want to be nice to a visiting Brit.
There may be some truth in that.
Yeah.
And it's true that we've had difficulties before. I mean, you mentioned the Vietnam War.
Yeah.
I found a great quote when I was looking at what to write about the relationship with the US, which was the Secretary of State Dean Rusk.
Oh yeah.
In
the Vietnam
Vietnam
period.
War, when the Brits said we can't join you.
Yeah.
He told a reporter, one of your predecessors, well, don't expect us to help you when the Russians arrive in Sussex. Well, so I think you got to keep a sense of perspective.
Yes, you have.
Although I think we've also got to think about the structural shifts and the changes in Europe's position, in the UK's position too.
Yeah, I think there is a huge structural shift going on in terms of NATO.
Yeah.
In terms of America's attitude towards it. I think that the Article 5 guarantees, the sort of the all for one and one for all centerpiece of the North Atlantic Treaty, which essentially means that if you are thinking of invading Belgium, you're going to face the Americans. That's pretty much so damaged now that I'm not sure as a deterrent it works. And I know that as a deterrent it doesn't work in the way that it might. When push comes to shove, or came to shove, who knows what would happen. And of course there will be different presidents in America. But I do think it's time for the Europeans to get a bit more grown up about our own security. You know, we need to realize we are rich countries and we need to find ways of looking after ourselves together. But you know, we cannot rely on our rich cousins across the Atlantic. Quite rightly, actually.
Quite rightly, and I agree. I strongly agree.
Yeah.
It's beginning to rain.
Yes.
And I suggest we go back in.
It's April in Britain. It's raining. My
raining.
God. I've got a
April
coat.
showers.
At least I've got a coat.
I know, but we're near the house.
Yeah.
It's been fantastic to walk around the lake with you.
It's a great pleasure.
And just a real,
Yeah.
really nostalgic to
Yes.
talk about the Middle East together,
Oh,
which
amazing.
I suspect you still love as much as I do.
Well, yes, it's
for
a
all of the challenge.
it's a bit like a virus.
Yeah,
It gets into your bloodstream.
it's definitely in the
Yeah.
bloodstream.
Yeah, it's in the
But-
bloodstream.
Thanks so much for staying on and great to catch
It's a
up.
pleasure. It's a
Thanks a
pleasure.
lot,
Great
Jerry.
to be.
Thanks
Great
a lot.
to be here.